Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to the channel and to the 70th episode of The Rolling Stone, and also the penultimate episode for August. The summer is winding down. In a normal year, the schools would be opening, people would be talking about vacations, but of course, we don't live in a normal world anymore. The normal world pretty much ended back in February and March. We have BC AD to divide the timeline between before and after the birth of Christ. I think that future historians will also divide the 21st century into BC and AC, before the corona and after the corona, and everything will be seen as everything will before the coronavirus. It will be seen as sort of a straight line. Everything, you can kind of see the pattern of everything building up, action, reaction, that sort of thing. After the coronavirus, everything is going to explode. It's going to be like a Rorschach painting. Or at least that's my thought of how future historians are going to look at the times that we're living in right now. But we've got a show to put on, and in keeping true to what I just said, where if that nothing is normal anymore, I am going to do something very abnormal. Because as you probably know, this past week, for 4 nights, the Democratic National Convention was streaming. Streaming because, of course, they didn't gather. The conventions aren't gathering in person this year because of the aforementioned coronavirus. So it would be logical and natural for, a minor pseudo-talking head like myself to analyze the hell out of it. Talk about who spoke when and what this means because this person said that, etc., etc. Not going to do it. I'll be completely honest, gang. I didn't even watch the Democratic National Convention. Not out of protest, not out of, oh, well, it's just stupid. But simply because I realized that there was no point in watching it. It's not like presidential debates, which I did watch. It's not like a State of the Union address or anything like that. We knew from the get-go what was going to happen at this streaming pseudo-convention. We knew what was going to be said, and so there was no point to watch it. I made this point on Twitter. It is vital to know what your enemies are saying about you, but one of the silver linings of social media is that you can actually tap into what your enemies are saying about you 24/7 anytime you want. So why waste extra time in hearing a bunch of talking heads and politicians say what you can just go at any time of the day or night onto Twitter and read? Made sense to me, and I told people, don't watch the DNC. Don't. Put your time to better use. Read a book, watch a movie, get creative. Just do something. So we're not talking about the Democratic National Convention. Yes, I mean, Joe Biden very gratefully and very humbly accepted the nomination. People were fainting and swooning because apparently in his acceptance speech, Biden quoted Soren Kierkegaard, who is a 19th century philosopher. And everyone, of course, made the obvious point that anyone on the left would make. Does Trump even know who Kierkegaard is? I'm willing to bet that most of the people who are progressives didn't know who Kierkegaard is either. Isn't it funny how in this time where the straight white European male is the most dangerous thing in the world, everyone now is ogling one straight white European descended male for quoting another straight white European descended, or in this case European male. I mean, that's how topsy-turvy, how contradictory our time is. But Having said that, I'm going to talk about something else that has to do with politics, because the action wasn't taking place at the Democratic National Convention. The action is taking place other places. Have you heard of a guy named John Thompson? And it's okay if you haven't, because honestly, this guy just popped up on the national radar. John Thompson is a candidate for the Minnesota House of Representatives for District 67A. And he is a member of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, okay, which is just a fancy title for the state Democratic Party. Technically, the Democratic Farmer Labor Party is its own independent entity, but it is heavily affiliated with the National Democrat Party. And just in case you're interested, long story short, the Democratic Farmer Labor Party was formed in 1944 when the State Democrat Party and the Farmer Laborer Party merged together. And the Farmer Labor Party was a progressive, very left-leaning state party that held great sway in the state of Minnesota from when it was formed in 1918, right after World War I, to 1944, when it and the state of Minnesota's Democrat Party merged together. And when I say that it held a lot of influence in Minnesota and in Minnesotan politics, I'm not kidding. They elected several men as governor, sent several people to Congress, and of course to the state legislature. So it was a big deal in its time. But John Thompson is a member of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, and he just won his primary for the state congressional seat in the state districts 67A. Again, okay, we're not talking about Congress in Washington, D.C. We're talking about Minnesota's legislature, okay? So he won his primary for Minnesota's House of Representatives. And this John Thompson won his primary, which pretty much means that he is going to walk into that state congressional seat. He's not going to face a lot of opposition now that he won his primary. Well, John Thompson, after he won his primary, he held a rally in Hugo, Minnesota, okay? And this is part of what he said at said rally. Here it is.
Black skin I'm in. I'm a black man being terrorized by this fucking Klansman right here. We are terrorized by the Grand Wizard. Y'all got the Grand Wizard living in your goddamn neighborhood. All the Klan exists in Hugo, Minnesota, and it's right here. Don't run now. Don't run now, racist white people. I'm here. Oh yeah, we pull up. We pull the fuck up. And we're here. Come on over here with your Blue Lives Matter sign. Blue lives ain't shit. And if people in Hugo don't support black people, fuck Hugo, Minnesota. I meant to say that. Now we can get to what I was talking about.
Now, the house that John Thompson and his little band of insurrectioning Jacobins, okay, the house that they're gathered outside of, that is actually the home of Bob Kroll. And Bob Kroll happens to be the Minneapolis Police Federation president in Hugo, okay? So if you heard what John Thompson was screaming when he was screaming his head off, is that Bob Kroll is an effing Klansman because Bob Kroll happens to be an effing policeman. That's basically the gist. And John Thompson, if you heard again, is being oppressed. He's being oppressed by Bob Kroll, simply by Bob Kroll's existence. And let me just pause for a second to point out a very obvious point, okay? Isn't it funny how the man who claims that he's being oppressed is the man who not only won a primary for a state representative's seat, okay? Which means that, again, it would be very, very unlikely that he is defeated in November, meaning that this man who claims that he is oppressed is going to be one of the handful of people who make the laws and govern his state. Okay, the man who claims that he's oppressed is the one who is able to stand out in the broad daylight with a mob and shout obscenities at Bob Kroll and at his family. If you saw those girls that the camera panned to a couple of times, those are his teenage daughters who were just out in their yard, on their property, having a barbecue for the weekend, and then you have this guy coming up and saying that your father is an effing Klansman simply because he's a policeman. And then when you go inside to escape his abuse so you're not hearing him shriek at you through a megaphone, then you are also the villain. You are exhibiting your white supremacy and your white fragility because you just don't want to hear the justified complaints of a black man. Okay? That guy is the one who's being oppressed. The oppressor is the one who is actually being screamed against. That's the craziness of our time. And that's the Orwellian narrative that we are all being told that we must swallow and like it, okay? I just wanted to get that obvious point out there first and foremost. Now, Thompson actually apologized for his little rant. He made an apology on Facebook last Sunday because this rant happened last week. This is what Thompson said on Facebook, quote, "I became an activist and ran for the legislature to make a difference, to work diligently to fix our broken criminal justice system, dismantle institutional racism, and honor my friend Philandro Castile and become a symbolism of help within our community. I want to make a positive difference, and my comments on Saturday were not helpful. Inflammatory rhetoric is not how I want to address the important issues we're facing, and I apologize. I'm not apologizing for my passion to fight injustice," unquote. So, make a special note of that, gang. He's not apologizing for calling Bob Kroll an effing Klansman. He's not apologizing for heaping abuse on Kroll's teenage daughters when they were doing nothing except barbecuing. What he is apologizing for is the strategic mistake that he made in actually allowing himself to be filmed while saying these things, which then, of course, made it inevitable that that clip that I just showed you went viral on the internet, which then made it inevitable that he would receive some sort of backlash. That's what he's apologizing for. Oops, showed my hand a little too early. I better make the usual meaningless mea culpa so that this is all smoothed over. Because when he says, "I'm not apologizing for my passion to fight injustice," what he is saying, that is code for saying that he still believes that Bob Kroll is an effing Klansman because he is a white police officer. And wouldn't matter, actually, in this day and age, what his skin color was. Being a policeman means that you are a Klansman, the equivalent of, and an oppressor. That's just the times that we live in. So that's what John Thompson is actually apologizing against. He's apologizing for being caught, for showing his hand too early. He's not apologizing for the hatred and the racism and the sheer audacity that he displayed last Saturday. And that's important. That is hugely, hugely important, because what this means is that the hate that he displayed last week is still inside. He hasn't had a Christmas Carol moment where suddenly he sees the error of his ways and he's going to change. No. He's still just as hateful, just as bigoted, just as racist, just as tyrannical as he was last Saturday. This apology is meaningless. Now, why is that important? Well, because of this. Are you comfortable, if anyone who subscribes to my channel, anyone who's watching this video is from Minnesota, let me ask you this question. Are you comfortable with someone like John Thompson making your laws, governing you in the state capitol? Are you comfortable with that? And now let me broaden that question out. Would anyone who is subscribed to the channel, anyone who happens to be watching this video, would anyone in any state be comfortable with someone like John Thompson in their state capital making their laws? Would anyone be comfortable with someone like Thompson in Washington, D.C. making the laws, in any sort of position of power, anywhere near any of the levers of power? Would you be comfortable with that, knowing that this man is as hateful as he is, as displayed by his own words and his own actions? You shouldn't be. You really, honestly should not be. It is not racist. It is not bigoted. It is not intolerant of you to be honest and say, damn no, I would not be comfortable with someone like that in any sort of position of power. Because if Bob Kroll is an effing Klansman, simply because he's a white police officer, then who do you think is going to be targeted by John Thompson? Who do you think he is going to wield his power against? It's going to be anyone who does not fall in line with his ideology, the ideology of leftism, of BLM, of Antifa, etc., etc. So it doesn't matter what your occupation is. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. It doesn't matter what sex you are. If you don't toe the line, you are John Thompson's enemy. And he is perfectly willing to let you know that he thinks you're his enemy. And since you're his enemy, it only makes sense that he is going to use his power, both at the state capital in Minnesota, and if he moves up, to becoming the governor of Minnesota, or if he goes to the Minnesota Senate, or if he eventually parlays this into Washington, D.C. in some shape or form, he is going to direct his power against you, who he sees as his mortal enemies. It's kind of funny. It would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. But this shows us, John Thompson shows us what happens, again, when we lose the culture. Because you cannot have conservative government. Mark Stein has made this point several times. You cannot have a conservative government when the culture isn't conservative itself. That is what this shows us. And to get back to the point I was about to make, the one that would be hilarious if it wasn't so tragic. Up until the primary season, up until the primary elections, so many people I saw were honestly thinking that people like AOC and Ilhan Omar were going to be primaried out, because they continually pointed to these polls which said that even in their districts, women like AOC, representatives like Ilhan Omar, were not polling very highly. They only had, 24% approval rating. They only had 30% approval rating. And people were getting excited and saying, oh, they're going to be primaried. This is great. The people are tired of them. The silent majority is going to strike. Guess what? Every single one of the squad won her primary. Not only that, but actually people like them won their primary. So, for example, there was John Thompson. He won his primary. Or there was Cori Bush in St. Louis. Cori Bush is more than likely, who is an activist, she is more than likely going to be elected to Congress. Okay? Not just Missouri's state Congress, but actually our Congress. She is going to be making laws for the entire country. Look her up, Cori Bush. She was an activist until she decided to get into politics. Okay? So instead of the people actually turning against AOC and Ilhan Omar and their ideology, their narrative, their idea of what America is and what it should be, more people like them won their primaries and more than likely are going to be elected into positions of power. This is what happens when you lose the culture. And that's why it is so vitally important to win the culture back, because it's only when you start winning the culture back are you actually going to start winning elections and winning in politics again. That is story number one.